Hello, my lovelies. I hope you are fantastic. And today, thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening or watching if you're on YouTube. I want to talk to you about something that is so close to my heart. Like, I am so passionate about it. You do not want to get me on this soapbox, but I am so passionate about it. And it's kind of my zone of genius, and why I'm so great at getting my clients such amazing results and helping them to do that. And so I'm going to share with you some of that today. So, I always say with anxious attachment style, our attachment styles are created in childhood and usually from the ages of 0 to 7, actually. And, if you have an anxious attachment style, that would have been created in childhood. It would have been, it would have been, it would have been. And I know there is some myths around, oh no, I got it from an ex, a toxic ex, but actually the way I always look at it is this: you entertain that toxic relationship and stayed in it because you had these wounds and because you probably had an anxious attachment style. So that's always a good sign that you probably already had it, and you would have had it because it comes from childhood. It comes from our attachment to our caregivers. And it creates something in us like an abandonment wound, and the abandonment wound can be emotional or physical. So sometimes it can be somebody physically leaving you, but most times, and how I've seen it, is it's emotional. It's an emotional neglect there, that your needs and wants weren't met at somehow, some way. Your needs and wants weren't met, and it sometimes isn't even something you're aware of. I have so many clients that come to me and like, oh no, I had a happy childhood, nothing really happened. And I get it. But then when you start working with me, we uncover, some of the ways that maybe your needs weren't met. And it doesn't mean that you didn't have a happy childhood and that your parents did anything wrong. I am not advocating for, blaming anyone, but it is so important, if you want to overcome your attachment style, that you have to get to your root cause. Like, I cannot explain this enough. And when people do this, I see, oh, a shift in them. It's incredible. Like, they just change because it all makes sense. Who you are right now as an adult, the relationships that you have with yourself and with others, is coming from your childhood. So if you want to change that, you have to acknowledge and heal and, be aware of that childhood and the patterns that are playing out for you to be able to then break them and create new patterns for you and new relationships with yourself and with others. So, this is not in any way about blaming anyone. It's not about anything at all. So, I know a lot of people feel guilt towards their parents and things like that. I get it completely, but it's not about calling anyone else out. It's just about acknowledging, wow, this impacted me, and this is what I'm acknowledging, and I'm accepting, and I'm choosing to change that pattern now. That's all it is. But we have to be aware of where it's coming from. And you know it's sometimes it's a big event, it's a big trauma, and sometimes it's just a small trauma, something that you haven't even recognized. Like I said, there's lots of people that don't realize until they start connecting the dots, and this is my zone of genius. I am excellent at connecting the dots and helping people to see how those patterns are playing out, where they are now and where they come from. This is how I see my clients just shift instantly and just release things that have been, holding them down for so long, because the connecting of the dots has happened. So I want to share with you some five common root causes that I have seen throughout working with many clients as to where an anxious attachment style comes from. And yeah, let's dive in. Let me just check my notes. So yeah, let's go. Okay, so number one, first thing you should know is that, codependency is a word that's used quite a lot. Codependency and anxious attachment style are the same thing. Now, codependency was born out of this idea initially that children of parents that drink or use substances, it creates codependency. It creates codependent children and adults that come out of that, right? And the same thing with anxious attachment style. So the number one thing, and not the number one thing, but one of the ways that I see anxious attachment style formed is that they would have had a parent that is a drinker or addicted to substances. And what I want to say is why they recognize that codependency initially they thought came from this. There are so many different ways to get anxious attachment style and codependency, and it's not just this way. So I just want to caveat that right now. And a lot of my clients, this is not the way they got it. But there is a lot of clients that definitely did have this, and I personally had this myself. And what really surprises me that people don't realize, and I think because it's been so normalized that they have a parent that drinks too much, people just normalize it as, oh, that's normal. And I get it, like I was the same. But actually what you don't realize is that if you have a parent that is a drinker or an addict, or you know either or, what you don't realize is that for a child that creates your anxious attachment. Your anxiety begins at that point because you become hypervigilant to this parent, because you never know what you're going to get. You never know if one day they're going to be really nice to you and the next day they might act really weird, because there's an inconsistency there. So it's literally creating that, fear in your nervous system already of love is not always safe. I don't know what I'm always going to be getting. It's not always unconditional for me. So it blows me away that people don't realize how much of an impact this has on you. And I get it because society has just made it normal, but it's not normal, and it is literally creating these things. So first thing, the hypervigilant, and then you become a people pleaser because you just want them to be happy and you want to have the happy mood, you want to have the happy version of them, and you think that's your responsibility to make that, and it's not your responsibility. And maybe there's also things of like trying to get them to stop drinking and they won't stop drinking, or taking drugs, whatever it is, they won't stop that. So then it seeps in even more that I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm responsible for their happiness, it's me that's done bad. If they're in a bad mood, I've not managed this situation very well. I'm the one that's being hypervigilant, but they're in a bad mood and I've done something wrong. It creates all of this fear and anxiety in you because you're not getting that consistency and that you deserve. You deserve consistency. And that you're a child, you're a little child. It creates all these patterns. So do you see how that would be creating the patterns that you're having now in relationships, where you're hyper vigilant, you're looking for clues that their love is not going to be safe for you, and that, oh no, you're managing their moods and you're trying to people please and you'll just go along with whatever they want. Your needs and wants don't matter, and you don't have any boundaries because you're just responsible for them. Do you see how that creates that pattern for you? So that is definitely one way that I see anxious attachment style come. And so just think about, how, if you experience this, how this might have actually be playing out in your relationships today. And on top of that, some drinkers or addicts can be really nasty, or they can, so it can be quite abusive. Or what if they let you down and disappointed you often? Then if somebody, makes plans with you and they cancel it, you might be coming from that place of, oh my god, I'm afraid to be disappointed. I know I experienced this. They're letting me down, and it's all because it's coming from that child inside of you. I grew up with alcoholics, and I was exactly this person. Like I was so used to being disappointed and let down. Like it was just normal for me that I expected it, and it had this horrible feeling inside of me, and it used to trigger me desperately as I got older, but it was just coming from that little girl inside of me. And all of these things, all of these anxious attachment style symptoms were just symptoms that I had as a child when I was trying to manage a situation. Think about even like fixing and saving. That is very much part of anxious attachment style codependency. You know, I was very much a fixer and save. I was trying to fix and save these addicts from themselves. And, you know, that's where we create these fixing and saving roles that we then have in relationships. And yes, they might be different. We might go for people that are not, you know, the same necessarily, but there'll be something where we have to play that role, and that role is playing out, and we're people pleasing, we're fixing and saving, and we're hyper vigilant and all of these things. And it's just that inner child inside of us that's replaying those patterns for us that we have learned. So that is number one. Number two that I see quite a lot of is like an emotionally unavailable parent. So I have a lot of clients that might come to me that have anxious attachment style, but they might recognize that they have a parent that might sit on the avoidance spectrum, and actually they're quite emotionally unavailable with them and didn't really give them that much warmth or interaction, and wasn't able to emotionally meet their needs. They might have been there physically, but they weren't emotionally able to meet their needs, and I have seen that quite a lot. So maybe that might fit into your camp of, you know, it's not necessarily that a parent did anything wrong. You know, it wasn't necessarily that there was a big trauma, but it does create that thing of that your needs were not met because of that. And then what ends up happening is you go in the cycle of attracting avoidance, and you live out that scenario in your head and in your inner child of trying to change them and trying to win their approval. And actually it's just that you're trying to win that parent's approval. So I see that a lot that comes up as well. And then the other one, number three, is that, you know, I've seen it a lot with parents that might have been really focused on education. So they're really focused on academics, and they're really focused on, you know, meeting the child's needs in terms of having a roof over their head and money and education, which is fantastic. And they might be really focused on like the child getting really good grades, which is fantastic, but they might be missing out on some of like the other needs that a child needs. So for instance, it will be creating like an overachiever of a child and a perfectionist, but it's like that love is conditional based on them getting the right results and, you know, being perfect. And then that creates the anxious attachment wounds that you see in your relationships, where you try to please and be perfect and overachieve in your relationships, in your life, and in everything, where you just work really hard, and it creates that dynamic of trying to get your parents' approval again. And because, you know, those needs weren't met, you've learned that love is conditional based on you doing these things. And I just want to say it right now, love is not meant to be conditional, guys. Like, love is not meant to be conditional. It is meant to be unconditional. When you came out and was birthed into this world, you were worthy of love, unconditional love. And it's just some of these conditions that have been placed on us that creates these limits within us, and these beliefs and these voids and these feelings of not feeling good enough and worthy, and, you know, it's not safe to be loved. So yeah, so that is another way that I have seen it, in that parents are really hyper focused on these things, and their love is conditional based on this, which makes sense. And then the fourth way that I have seen it show up quite a lot is a parent that might have narcissistic traits. I'm not gonna say that somebody is a narcissist, but even if they have narcissistic traits, it can very easily create anxious attachment style and codependency. I would say that, you know, I experienced some of these myself, and I was the most codependent child you could ever imagine. Riddled with anxiety. So for instance, a narcissistic parent with traits, these traits, they might put other people down, they might lack empathy, they might think that they deserve special treatment, they, you know, really see themselves as self-important, even though it's not real. Narcissism is not real, but they'll have this appearance of an inflated self-esteem. They might play favorites with their children. Often the child might be a scapegoat, or one will be the favorite, and they'll kind of play favorites with the children. or they might expect the child to be the caregiver to them. Maybe the child is actually the one that has to be responsible and they don't have to be responsible, and because they have a lot of lack of empathy, they don't actually care who they're hurting or care that they're impacting you and how they're making you feel. And your needs and wants don't matter. They don't really have any boundaries. They definitely don't want you to have any boundaries. And they kind of see you as an attachment to them, like you're an entitlement to them, and that everything is kind of about them. So they are just some of the some of the traits, and maybe they look for validation from other people, but not, that's all they care about. So that creates like the perfect codependent anxious attachment style, because if that is the dynamic that you've grown up in, it's not a fun dynamic. It's not a fun dynamic at all. So a child will naturally start to people please and be perfect and just try to manage the situation, and they are not allowed to have their needs and wants because nobody cares about them if the parent is like this, and they're just a use. And you learn very quickly on that you don't matter and that you're just here to do what they need to do. And unfortunately, people with narcissistic traits can be a bit manipulative, so you don't have boundaries, and it's like the perfect scenario in that respect to create anxious attachment style and codependency. And the love is definitely very unconditional. So that is definitely one way that I have seen it play out as well. And then number 5 that I have seen is divorce. Divorce is some way that I have seen it play out. And I think this can make sense because it's like a separation, and of course physical abandonment is very much a part of this too. So obviously if you had a parent that left you, then of course this would create an anxious attachment style. So I've only put 5, but there's actually loads and loads of different root causes. But I just want to drop that in there, that of course if you had a parent that left you, then that absolutely would cause an abandonment wound. And even if you can't remember it, so for instance for me, I was 10 days before my 3rd birthday, before when my dad left, and I have never seen this man again or heard from him. And I was less than 3, and you would think that would have no impact on me, but trauma lives in the body. A child remembers these things. Well, the body remembers these things even if I can't remember it necessarily. And it creates this, like, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here to add on, so it's more like 6 root causes of AA, but this is something that really, like, I don't think people realize, and I just want to educate on it, because it was causing a lot of problems for me. And so, like, what you don't realize is that your body remembers it even if you don't remember it, and that anxiety is there. And just think, if you're a child and your only relationships in this world are your first relationships in this world are your parents, and you've had a parent in your life for a certain amount of time, and then suddenly they're gone, they're completely gone, or even somewhat gone, which can happen in divorce, and we'll talk about that in a second. But imagine they're completely gone. A child knows that. A child knows that. Even if you are so young, a child can feel that loss, that somebody has gone. What has happened there, right? And so that will live in you. And it definitely was a huge impact for my anxious attachment style. When I had when anyone would ever try and leave me, perhaps we had a conflict and I was in a relationship and I was in a conflict, and they would try and leave me, like, to take themselves away from the situation, it used to trigger my anxious attachment style like insane amounts. I couldn't even imagine. I didn't even understand what was going on. I didn't know I had an anxious attachment style at the time, but it was so triggering to me. And it was only after that relationship and after I realized what anxious attachment style was, I was like, oh my God, of course this is part of my father walking out. That of course it would trigger me. Of course it was creating that. My body was remembering it the whole time, even when I didn't realize. I'd experienced so much trauma as a child. I 2 minutes, I kind of just thought, well, you know, the dad situation was the least of my worries, but actually it was very much showing up in my body, and the impact that it was having on me and the trigger that it was causing. So I just want to note that this is such a big thing that people do not even realize. Anyway, so on to divorce. Divorce is not dissimilar to that, although of course with divorce it's not a thing of like, you might you know, in a lot of situations you will still see both parents. There's still a inconsistency there. There's still a thing of, you know, you've gone from having both parents all the time to maybe not having one of those parents all the time, and not to mention some of the stress that might come under, and a parent might not be able to, you know, handle these situations. So that kind of inconsistency plays out as well. But all of it is very you know, traumatizing to a child, of those things changing. And you know, it's not always the case that this will be, but I'm just saying that this can cause it, where there's a bit of inconsistency there, and perhaps maybe what the dynamic ends up being, it can create it. You know, especially if a child goes on and sees that, you know, they're not getting as much time with their parent that has left, and maybe they've got another family that can create some things for them. And maybe the parent that has stayed is not, you know, managing so well, and you know, there is lots of different dynamics that can play out there, that I have seen that divorce can sometimes cause this for you. So there is a lot there, and these are really heavy subjects, and I get that, but I actually personally love talking about these things, because these are the root cause, and it's so important to get to the root cause. So I hope that that is helped by me being able to share those things for you to be able to identify some of these things. And, you know, of course, if you want my help to connect these dots, and you know, not even just that, like even if you are aware of where it comes from, what do you do then? Because I was so aware of where my trauma was, most of it, but then what do you do? What do you move forward with? And this is exactly what you do in my programs. You change that for you. You change those patterns, you heal those wounds, and you move forward into security, secure attachment. So yay, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you soon.